Perhaps the most popular and well-known Datsun model aside from the Z car is the 510. They're extremely collectible and popular, especially as platform for engine swaps, and because of that it's very hard to find one in stock form nowadays. So what made these things get such a following, and what were they like from the factory? What were they like the way Nissan intended? Today let's take a look back at not only the first 510 that everyone loves, but also the second 510 that everyone forgets. Wait a minute. Is this Dwight Schrute's dad? My name is Chris and I'm here to tell you that I am not an AI channel, so if you're looking for mindless AI slop, you've come to the wrong place. You might actually learn something here. With that said, let's look at some Datsuns. The Datsun 510 is the export of the Datsun 510 series Bluebird, Bluebird being the model name and 510 being Nissan's internal model code for that generation, but they used 510 as its model name for most export markets. The 510 came to North America for the 1968 model year, originally in 4-door sedan and station wagon forms. The 2-door would be released midway through the year in June of '68. These were lightweight, simple rear-drive cars, not with super powerful engines, but it was and is very easy to swap in engines and transmissions from other Datsun models because they had a lot of interchangeable parts at that time. So while these originally came with the L16, a 1.6-liter single overhead cam engine rated at 96 horsepower, you can easily swap in an L18 or L20 from later Datsun models, and of course nowadays we see all sorts of engines crammed into these things. But from the factory, the 510 has front disc brakes, 4-wheel independent suspension with McPherson struts up front and semi-trailering arms on the rear. And let me tell you, combined with an overhead cam engine in 1968, that was a pretty high-tech car for an entry-level price point of just under $2,000. Adjusting for inflation, that's just under $20,000 today, and you can't buy any new car for that now. On top of that, standard features included luxurious white wall tires, chrome wheel covers, a driver's side mirror, bucket seats, a glove box, full carpet even. Now I read in an old Motor Trend article from 1969, which I'm going to show you in a second because it's actually quite funny, that because of the advanced for the time tech and just its overall look, people were comparing it to the BMW 1600, calling it a cheaper BMW. But then kind of saying, well, it's not as fast, it doesn't handle as well, blah, blah, blah. It's a discount version. But Eric Dahlquist from Motor Trend said, no, Virginia, the Datsun 510 isn't a less expensive duplicate of a BMW 1600, but it is close, and it's not supposed to be. You see in the article, Eric points out that the error in the logic of this comparison is that the 510 was not built to compete with the BMW. It's the Beetle you're supposed to compare it with, dummies! It's actually a really good article. He talks about all the good things the 510 has going for it, but also bluntly points out its shortcomings, like poor handling standard tires, and horrible cold starting. At the end he tells Datsun how to fix it. I tell you, if Motor Trend still wrote articles like this today, I'd actually read them. Transmission options for the original 510 was a 4-speed manual, or there was an optional 3-speed automatic. Autocars come with a column shifter. The dash has very American style gauges, a long horizontal speedo with small fuel and temp gauges inside. To the right of the horizontal speedo, there's a square where an optional analog clock goes. To the right of that is where the optional radio goes. Behind the steering wheel, and kind of an awkward spot in my opinion, especially if you have an auto with the column shift, is where the heater controls are. Now its second year, 1969, actually brings a number of updates. 69 cars have a different grille with the Datsun D in the center instead of the full word. The tail lights are changed slightly, the 510 badge on the rear is moved from the left of the passenger side tail light to below it, and the license plate light is moved from a single light that is actually mounted on the bumper facing up to the 2 side lights that was pretty common in the 70s and 80s. 69 also adds round rear side marker lights to meet new DOT regulations. The wipers were changed to sweep conventionally. On 68 models, both wiper blades point towards the center of the windshield and sweep out. They did update the interior a bit as well. The seats now have headrests. They've changed the dash slightly. The top of it doesn't have that dip in the middle anymore. The gauges are the same style, but they've been updated slightly too, and the climate controls now use vertical sliders instead of horizontal. For 1970, the grille changes again. The emblem is now the full Datsun word once again, but is offset to the lower driver's side. Both front and rear side marker lights are updated to a larger rectangle design. The front fender Datsun badge has been moved back behind the wheel arch, and it's now made of chromed plastic instead of metal. The rear Datsun badge on sedans is moved up to the trunk lid, and wagons get round reflectors added below the taillights to meet new DOT regulations. The dash has been significantly redesigned for 1970, the most obvious change being redesigned gauges in round gauge pods. The speedos to the left, temp and fuel gauges are in the center, and a big blank with dummy lights is on the right, which is where the optional tack or clock goes. By the way, other dealer installed options included air conditioning, an 8-track, a wooden steering wheel, a roof rack for the wagon, a passenger side view mirror, and many other quality accessories available at your local Datsun dealer. The climate controls have been relocated above the optional radio, now with a knob for fan speed and map light control. The map light is an option though, and this car doesn't have it. That's not a button, that's actually a blank. If it had a map light, it would have a knob similar to the fan speed knob, like this. But the graphic and the on-off label is on every single car. This is perhaps the most outrageous switch blank I've ever seen. Look at it taunting you. You could have had a map light, but you were too cheap. Imagine you're on a date in your fancy new 510 and she sees this and asks you to turn on the map light so she can find something in her purse. And you're like, ooh, yeah, I don't actually have a map light. Oh no, that's just a blank. You gotta pay for that option. Well, I guess now it doesn't matter that you don't have a bench seat. Not much changes for 71, although they apparently went to a single key for all locks on the vehicle. In 1972, they finally got rid of that ridiculous map light switch blank. There is a red thing now that reminds you to fasten your seatbelts. It literally looks like a button you would pin to your suspenders or something that Nissan just shoved there. 1973 is the last year for the OG 510. Now there is a second gen, in the US and Canada at least, which many people forget about, probably because it's not actually a Bluebird car. It's another model based on the Nissan Violet, which would eventually evolve into the Nissan Stanza, and actually in some markets like Australia and New Zealand it was called the Datsun Stanza, but in the US and Canada they revived the 510 model name for it because of the original 510's popularity. But before we talk about that one, 1973 did bring a few more changes. First of all, they slimmed down the line to just 2-door models, which were the ones that were selling the best anyways. For 1973, to meet new regulations, bumpers now came with large rubber guards, and the US market got a standard rear window defroster. I believe that was already standard in Canada. They also added a new backlit heater control panel and backlights to the washer and headlight knobs. You could recognize the backlight knobs over the regular ones because they are green instead of black. In some markets, there was a special 510 trim known as the Triple S model. What does that stand for? S for super, S for sports, S for sedan, a superb car. Now, this is an early SSS European ad, I'm guessing for the UK, or actually maybe it could be for Australia since it is being marketed as the Datsun 1600 in this ad. But anyway, the SSS model came with special badging, a wooden steering wheel, a standard tack and trip meter, and twin side draft Hitachi carburetors on the 1.6 liter engine. And there's a couple other engine upgrades as well, and this gives it a horsepower rating of 109. Now, most sources say that the SSS model was not offered in North America, and I certainly can't find any evidence that it did. But there was one article I read on the Wayback Machine, which I want to shout out because it was a great article and I learned a lot from it. It's called the Datsun 510 Spotter's Guide by Michael Spreadbury. I'll put a link to it on the Wayback Machine in the description. Anyway, according to him, there was an SSS model in the US just for 1970, but it was a trim package and it didn't come with any of the engine or performance upgrades. Now, I can't find any evidence of one, pictures or old ads or mentions of it in the brochures, so maybe he's wrong. But everything else he says in the article seems to be accurate, so I don't know. I'll put it out to you Datsun 510 experts in the comments. Did it exist in the US as a 1970 trim package? Or did he just make a mistake on that? Someone watching this video must know. And that covers the first gen, so let's move on to the second generation. So here's what went down after the first 510. In 1973, Datsun introduced the 610 as the 510's official replacement. Like the 510, it was available in 2, 4-door, and station wagon versions. The 2-door was actually a hardtop, which was kind of cool. The 610 was still a Bluebird export. It originally came with the L18 engine, and from 74 on came with the L20B. But it was quite a bit larger than the 510, and in fact, until the introduction of the 810 in 77, the Maxima predecessor, it was Datsun's largest car in North America. Now the 610 still had some cool things going for it. It still had class-leading independent rear trailering arm suspension on non-wagon models, but it did apparently suffer from some drivetrain issues as well as excessive vibration and noise, some quality issues in other words. Now Nissan did some updates over the next few years to try and fix this model, but the main thing dealers were crying about was that it was too big and too expensive. These were starting around $2,600. Dealers were missing the smaller, lower-priced 510 because that's what their customers were still asking for, and they were letting Datsun corporate know. So in order to try and give dealers the car they were asking for, they added another new model to the lineup for 1974, this time an export of the Nissan Violet, and it was called the Datsun 710 in the US and Canada. Now here is where the number namings get confusing. The 610 is a larger, slightly more upscale car compared to the 510, so you would expect that pattern to continue with the 710. But no, it was smaller than the 610. The 710 was intended to be a closer replacement to the 510 than the 610 was. It also used the L20B, but here's the problem. Unlike the Bluebird, the Nissan Violet did not have independent rear suspension. So now all 710s were using one-piece rear axles, not just the wagons like before. And they didn't lower the price either. MSRP was now nearly $3,000. Nevertheless, the 710 hung around until 1977, never really selling well. So when it came time to introduce the second generation Nissan Violet here, they had two options. Well, actually three. They could have either improved it, given us something else to take its place, or trick consumers into buying it by giving it the same name as a previous car they do like. Yeah, I'm liking the sound of that last option. So meet the unrelated to the first second generation of the Datsun 510.
Nobody demands more from a Datsun. We are driven.
Some number, Datsun.
With the second generation 510, or Datsun Stanza as it was called if you lived down under, there were actually 4 body styles. A 2-door sedan, a 2-door hatchback, a 4-door sedan, and a 4-door wagon. Base price for the cheapest model in the US, the 2-door sedan, started at $4,093. Under the hood is the L20B. In the US market, it's rated at 110 horsepower and 112 pound-feet of torque, at least for 1978. In 79, it drops to 92 horsepower. I'm not 100% sure why, I guess different emissions. A 4-speed manual is the standard transmission on sedans and wagons, the hatchback gets a 5-speed manual, and there's an optional 3-speed automatic. But here's an annoying thing on the hatch with the 5-speed. The shift pattern has reverse and first in the same line, with reverse being where you would expect first to be. I don't know why they did this. Datsun was doing this on other models at the time too. You've probably heard me talk about it if you've seen some of my other videos. Like I know they were doing it on the 210. And I can't remember if they did it on the first generation 200SX or not. I think they did. But I'm not sure why they were doing this because it's very annoying for street driving. They put a warning buzzer on it to let you know when it's in reverse. They probably knew a lot of people would be putting it there out of habit, thinking it was first. But I can't help but think that if your car is going to require that, you should perhaps just change it to a normal shift pattern. Brakes are still front disc rear drum, and the suspension is McPherson strut up front, but solid rear axle with coil springs in the back. Like the 710, no independent rear suspension on this 510, even though that was one of the things that made the original 510 stand out. Now on a more positive note, and I might be in the minority on this, I don't know, but I actually think these look kind of cool. It's much more angular, but we are getting close to the 80s now, which is the decade of right angles. But I like this grille. The hatchback has really cool taillights, and I think the inside is pretty nice too. It's got a decent looking dash, you have a speedo, temp and fuel gauges, and an analog clock, and the circle to the left of the speedo is just dummy lights on most cars, but I'm sure there's an optional tack that would go there if so equipped. It's got a center console, good conventional climate control sliders, and a nice 3-spoke steering wheel. Of course, I've never sat in one of these, they all rusted away decades ago, but from the reviews I've read, the seats were decent, with good adjustability, and vision was really good. Road and wind noise, however, was apparently terrible. Now, a viewer sent me a 1979 Wheels magazine, an Australian publication, and as you can tell, they were also less than impressed with this generation. It's pretty funny to see these old honest reviews calling out lackluster models, because no one seems to do this anymore. Everyone just plays it safe. Gotta keep those press cars coming in, I guess. But it's like at this point, what's even the point of reading a modern car review from a magazine publication? If you've read the manufacturer's press release, you already know what the review is gonna say. Anyway, Wheels magazine did like the styling of the Stanza, like me, but they pretty much gave it the same criticism that the 510 got in America. Where's the independent rear suspension? Where's the better power to weight ratio? Why does this car rattle and hum down the highway like an open oil drum? Why could they do all these things right in 1968 but not today? I also read that in response to Wheels magazine's rather unfavorable Stanza review, Datsun's public relations chief flew to Sydney to meet with the editors to talk about the problems. From what I read, it sounds like he asked them to recreate some of their tests for him to show him the shortcomings they were complaining about, like the suspension shortcomings, noise and vibration issues. Some of the shortcomings he agreed with, or at least admitted existed, and he told them that spring and damper rates would be changed for Australian-built cars in the model years to come. But in other areas, he simply said that the car was suitable for the majority of car buyers who didn't have the high expectations of car enthusiasts. In other words, it's good enough. The very same thing many people will tell you today when you critique modern cars. You just don't have the right expectations. Now, this generation 510 ran from 78 to 81, and a mid-run facelift came in 1980. To be honest, I don't really know if they changed anything from 78 to 79. They look the same, but there is very little information online about these things. I couldn't even find 78 or 79 brochures at all. I couldn't even buy ones from Import Archive, and he has almost everything on there. But I do have a 1981 brochure, luckily, so let's talk about the refreshed version. As you can see, the 1980 model is updated with a new grille, a little bit more conservative looking, with rectangular headlights. Wagon taillights are unchanged, sedan taillights are updated but similar, and hatchback taillights are now very similar to the sedan taillights, not as unique or cool. I actually noticed that some 1985 10s have an empty grille with no emblem. I noticed that on some of the 1980 Nissan press photos and the one that Car and Driver road tested, but they added a Datsun badge on either for production or fairly early in the 1980 model year, because most of the ones that you'll find do have a Datsun badge on the grille. Overall though, I actually still do like the styling. I kind of like these square formal designs of the early 80s. I'm probably in the minority on that. Also for 1980, they've discontinued the 4-door sedan model, and the hatchback is now a 4-door, and then there's still a 2-door sedan and the wagon. On the inside, they've made some really good changes. There's a new dash, much more modern looking, with the radio and digital clock up high, almost inside an extended gauge cluster bezel. There's actually some 810 similarities going on with this dash now. There's even a little strip of wood grain across the dash. I really prefer this 3-spoke steering wheel. That seems to only be on 1980 models. In 1981, it looks like they switched to this steering wheel, unless that could also be a body style difference. Maybe the 3-spoke was only on the hatchback models. The arrangement of gauges is much better, and there are more of them. All 510s now come standard with full John Davis instrumentation. The engine has been updated. It's still the same 2-liter from the top of the block down, but like the 200SX, it now features Nissan's NAPS Z system, which stands for Nissan's anti-pollution system. Although unlike the 200SX, this engine is still carbureted, not fuel injected. Essentially, this is a new combustion chamber design which is hemispherically shaped, designed to make sure the fuel is burned more completely before the exhaust valve opens. They also recirculate more of the exhaust gas back through the EGR system. On California cars, this system goes a step further and has 2 spark plugs per cylinder. The end result is better fuel economy, less emissions, but there is more complexity. The power rating is still the same as the 79 model, 92 horsepower and 112 pound-feet of torque. So still nothing like the power to weight ratio the original 510 had. But for a car that the average person is just going to drive to the grocery store and whatnot, it's fine. They just did it a disservice by calling it a 510. A cargo light came standard on 4-door models. Split folding rear seats are standard on 4-door models. A cargo cover is standard on the hatch. Options include different radio options, air conditioning, a sunroof on the hatch, a roof rack on the wagon, or a deck lid rack on the sedan, stainless steel wheel trim rings, alloy wheels, and a passenger side view mirror. The second gen 510 is not a bad car. It's just not really a good car. It's just a car. And honestly, most of the disappointment about it stems from the fact that they called it the 510, a dirty trick to make you assume it would be like the previous one and buy it. But much like the name resurrections we see today, it's nothing like it. And a name does not sell a car alone. Well, actually, maybe in 2026 it does, but it didn't used to. In 1982, the 510 was replaced by the Nissan Stanza, and we'll be covering the Stanza on the channel soon.
Some number, Datsun.